Great. Hello, world. Podler team back at it again, doing some track 2 voicing. Apologize, I'm a little fried. I am in the middle of a purification, and often I like to kind of hide in my Lair Laugh cave during these periods. But it's good to get out a little bit at least, and so hanging out with good friends is the best way to do that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and sally forth. We're in the theme section of About Yourself. All right, I am Najee Coach. With me I have Najee, Ben, and Glenn. Mitchell will be joining us next time, and he's going to send in what he has in an email. Okay, so does anyone want to go first?
I actually had a question that I was working on because I was working on the beats earlier today. So I wanted to have something a little bit more than I normally do. And it has to do with the evidence, faith, fidelity, feelings beat. I wrote down some lines here, but I was wondering about the difference between faith and feelings. Like, I'm having a little bit of trouble distinguishing the two. I know faith is like, you know, like you believe something without there necessarily being any evidence, right? And different definitions will say, like, you know, to what degree the evidence may be. I think the one that I read was like making decisions not based on evidence, something like that. And then feelings, it's like, well, what is feeling? Because you can talk about in terms of like touch, that's a feeling, but then there's also feelings in terms of
technically, if you get sciencey with it, that's kind of a sensation. But yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
and then in
this case, I also more from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah, there's the emotional aspect to feeling as well, and then there's also, I feel like there's a whole bunch of other kinds of feelings which I don't really know how to describe them. They just all seem to be a little bit more like, you know, interpretations, like, you know, in your mind. Like, I think I'm getting, my spidey senses are tingling, like that kind of thing. Like, you know, like these kinds of feelings.
I would put the spidey sense thing probably a little more under the faith/speculation, abstraction, whatever you want to call it, vein. As far as the feelings, because that's basically, there's no,
I guess, the personal connection.
Yeah, well, on the first one, there's no like discernible evidence to back it up. With feelings, there is, it's a little different. There is evidence in a way, but it's often misapplied or overly weighted. So, for example, if something happens to you in a conversation and you feel aggressive, that is real, and so that is evidence of being offended. It's not actually technically evidence that offense was intended, or that what was stated was incorrect or was morally wrong. And so often people's feelings on whether something is morally wrong or is, you know, outside the boundaries of being a good human, that can be used as an argument against certain knowledge. Throughout history, two things that have often brought up a lot is it is known, kind of like speculation stuff, faith, like that's just a given. It's an automatic given, even though it hasn't been established yet. So that's the one, that's more the faith thing. But the feelings is more blasphemy, that you shouldn't say those things should not be allowed as evidence. It's a, either shouldn't be allowed as evidence, or on the other side, that feelings of being upset, aggression, sadness, pain, whatever, that is a kind of evidence on par with, you know, statistics or universal ways of doing things, even though that universal way of doing things may really mess up the chicken ritual in a certain place. And the chicken ritual has a lot of feelings to it. People did the chicken ritual when they were kids, and then they had a big chicken ritual when they became an adolescent into adulthood, and then they had kids, and the first thing you remember to do with their kids, they had the chicken ritual with their kids. So there's a lot of feelings associated with the chicken ritual. And now this new knowledge says that probably rituals should be done a little more like this. That's like a general thing, and there's some good data for that maybe. And they're like, oh, slow your roll, you're in chicken country, you know what I mean? And that you're basically putting argument forward is checked because it is offending, or the other side of that is feelings on a subject being taken as an evidence. evidence on par with universal empirical forensic evidence.
Right. So I feel like one thing that came to mind to me was mentioning feelings as something that should be understood. Like, why are they occurring to a person when they happen, and trying to understand what that whole process is. Like, you're getting angry. Well, why are you getting angry? You're getting sad. Why are you getting sad? It usually has to do with like a psychological belief that a person has about what's going on around them in terms of like their interpretation of the situation, the scenario. Right? I kind of like, that's kind of like how I interpret it. So a feeling doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, now I'm supposed to do this.
Right.
But I guess you could say that if a person like has made it into sort of like an instinctually, like when I feel this way, that means that I should react, I should do this sort of thing, because I only feel this way when, you know, like I've trained myself in some kind of a way to make it so that when I feel this way, it means that this situation is occurring, right? But, and that might be true, I think, right? But I'm not, it's really complicated. I don't, and you know, hard to understand exactly feelings and all this kind of stuff. But like, you get angry, and then you know that you get angry for these kinds of reasons, and so that means that there's a one-to-one, but not really. So it's best to just to kind of understand the feelings themselves and why they occur. Is that like a good position to have on when it comes to feelings? I'm not sure.
Have a position that seems like a well thought out position. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, I just want to read to you what I wrote here, and then we can also get into fidelity, which I want to do next. Right. So I think it's important to always maintain an open mind, and that no topic is above being scrutinized. To challenge one's ideas is important and necessary in the pursuit of finding truth. One should always strive to make decisions in life based on evidence and work towards gaining more when possible. That's kind of like that's talking about faith, but I never actually used the word faith in that sentence there. Feelings are meant to be understood. I guess I could say for why they occur. The meanings that we apply to them in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm. The weight, mm-hmm, the meaning.
And the meaning and weight we apply to them. And then fidelity, I didn't make a sentence for this yet, because I'm not 100% sure what fidelity means exactly. But so I was hoping to get some explanation from you a little bit. What?
Sure, it's its own thing, but in a way, it's similar to feelings and similar to faith. There's two aspects to it. The one thing that kind of is unique about it is basically the weight given to things already being a certain way. So in terms of speculation or faith, this often manifests in that classic line people make fun of from Game of Thrones, "It is known." And so what is, there is a fidelity to the way things have been. And people can sometimes feel that they are being disloyal to the way of life or the understanding of life they have known if they embrace new knowledge. They may feel that you are lacking in fidelity, or at the minimum that you are enticing them to weaken their fidelity because of, say, new things you're presenting. And so there can be a feeling of, I was taught this, and I've lived my life 20, 30, 40, 50 years, whatever, and it's been good to me. It's stood by me. It's always been here. It's worked so far, whatever label you wanted to go. And it can be like a superstitious thing. People resist things that they have had an allegiance to. And you can have an allegiance to a way of thinking. And so simply because you are stepping away, besides the fact that they may speculate that, oh, I think that God talked to me and I really believe that happened, for me that's a given. That's one thing. But there's another element simply of, I've actually prayed or done certain rituals or done certain ways of interacting with people throughout my life. What does that mean? I guess the essence of it. What does that say about me if I change on that now. People have a really hard time, even if you give them better data, they're like, but if I change now, that means that I was doing the wrong thing for 20 years. People resist that. They resist that, greatly. And as a part of that, they can also be like, that data that you're saying is corrupt, it's done good by me so far, I have a fairly happy life and so forth. So aren't I kind of like, poo-pooing this thing that was something I could count on? So even though you're challenging with, actually, can you count on that? Can you, if it's not actually based on the most correct data, which is obviously, a legit argument to make, but then there's people have their resistances. So on one hand, you shouldn't be resistant to better data if it's telling you a better position. You can see that. But also, there is a reason why humans are wired this way. You don't want to just leave something that's been a part of your life for a while and has been working to some significant degree to jump on something new, untested, just showed up. So there's a balance.
Yeah. Because I mean, there's speculative benefit, and as far as like your personal experiences go, that is like, that is a form of very, very limited evidence for yourself, like as far as like whether something's good or bad. Like if you, have experience doing something and, there's problems you personally, feel about it, that does mean something. But if there is stronger evidence that comes up that suggests that, well, maybe you want to take another look at this, then that's a reason to not just rely on your feelings and what you speculatively have thought up to this point.
Exactly. And so, Glenn, just to finish up there, how it can relate to the feelings angle is if you are giving maybe some analysis of something, and that analysis, however accurate, is going over into a certain bubble, and this person is a part of that bubble. This way, it comes lots of ways. This way happens quite a bit, and shutting down listening to what is being said because it's perceived, and obviously see feelings is related here. So it's a feelings thing, but it's the fidelity issue that kind of makes it happen, which is you are attacking that bubble. I have a bond to that bubble, therefore the evidence of it or the data of it or the truth of it is secondary. It's secondary to the fact that you are attacking something that I'm aligned with. So I'm going to take basically saying this is actually a question of whose side are you on? Well, it's not really. It's all about who has the data and where the data points to. But oftentimes you'll talk to people, you'll hit these walls. The wall of I'm insulted personally, that's the feelings, or I'm upset, whatever. The speculation or / given, like, it is known, everyone knows that this, how can you look at this and not say there's not a watchmaker, right? You know what I mean? There's a watchmaker, it just makes sense. And they're very attached to that idea, that speculation. That speculation makes a lot of sense to them. They've been cruising along with that for a while. But the fidelity one is loyalty. Loyalty to data or loyalty to people is being infringed on. And that is taken as a greater issue than whether or not the data they're holding is right or wrong.
So there's an issue between, are you trying to be faithful to the data and what it's saying, or are you trying to be faithful to or hold fidelity to some kind of like a group or some kind of like a way of thinking, or kind of like some kind of popular opinion or whatever it happens to be. Sort of like scientists, for example, what is it called? They're some scientists, they're given an incentive to want to find the kind of to do research that for a company that supports the company and what they want the scientists to find, essentially. Like they want to find evidence that proves that their product, whatever it might be, is actually a good product.
Right.
And so they'll say like, oh, like, so and such, I'll pay you like this much money, and you and your group of people find something sort of like related to that in a way.
It's a little bit, it's different, but they do have some correlation. What you're talking about is actually research bias,
right,
which comes from a lot of reasons. And the one you're mentioning there is actually greed. desire for money or career advancement. And there's related, but what I'm talking about is actually more, for example, it's often, if you look into like, great seekers throughout history, great philosophers, great shaman, things of this nature, there's a common theme. You don't have to do this, but often there will be a special relationship with lovers, with family, and the town in general. Often seekers or great thinkers, public intellectuals of high standing, high fiber, they will remove themselves so they can observe and just say what they observe without being a problem. So I don't know how much dating you guys have done, but you definitely come from family, so you'll probably know from this angle. Every family has a homeostasis to it. And new data comes in. When that new data comes in, you're like, dad's not going to like that. Sister's not going to like that. And that becomes heavy, heavier than that new data has new insight. It's seen more as a problem. And it's because it's going to mess up the bonded relationships one has. In fact, if you accept this data, which may disrupt bonded relationships, you can be seen as a traitor to that group that you allowed those thoughts to come in. You know what I mean? So like, let's say you're a religious family, you go up to college, you learn some, science and atheist stuff, some good history, good data collection. You come back and you're going to introduce some of these things. You can often be hit by, in certain families, you're disrupting our whole family.
Right.
You know what I mean? And often that's the end of the discussion. And so you often have a choice of just like leaving or accepting the situation as it is, because new data is not going to be allowed to ruffle this bond thing. And I'm sure you've seen enough sitcoms know this. New data comes in, guy or girl, whoever, but their partner, there's every group has an alternate reality. You just do. And data is the only thing that continually makes sure that your view in reality is getting closer to the truth. But every group is not actually having it. So there's an accepted alternate reality. So if you date someone, there's going to become like little things. An actress comes on TV, so-and-so says, I like her, don't like her, whatever, based on maybe feelings, for example. So that's where feelings may come in initially on that person. So for them, it's a feeling thing. But actually the other person, it might be a fidelity issue. Because the new data comes in and you recognize that's going to hurt the feelings or make the person's head dizzy of a person that I have to talk to all night. I'm going to sleep with them. We actually share our finances, blah, blah, blah. And so, everyone sees all the time sitcoms, both partners will often protect the other partner from things that are going to disrupt their worldview, their conceptualization of reality. And often this is seen as a noble thing, because you're trying to keep the person from being upset.
Their feelings hurt.
Their feelings hurt, exactly. Or not just feelings, it also could be their headspace. You don't want them to get like turned upside down. So feelings hurt or just their head scrambled. And you're trying to kind of protect them. But that protection is not actually as noble as it may seem.
And yeah, it could also be, this also too, not only trying to protect them, but also trying to protect themselves, because they like the relationship.
Yes.
The way that it's a certain way, right? And so if this person gets upset, then that means that, that person that broke the truth, broke out the truth, you know what I mean, is going to not going to be able to have that sort of like dialogue interaction with them in the way that they want to. So yeah. So that can also be, that's a little bit more selfish, but yeah, that definitely can play into it. But yeah, I mean, it's so stupid the way people do that kind of stuff, right? It makes me angry. It's like, just tell them the truth. They deserve to know the truth. And, whatever happens, happens. You just got to deal with it. You got to predict as well as you can possible scenarios that might happen and just kind of like deal with it. But trying to hide the truth from another person is really not doing anyone any favors. It's the weak play. So I guess that's my position essentially, but trying to like verbalize that or trying to put that into a beat. Let me kind of like think about that for a second.
Sure.
So fidelity, trying to stay, trying to maintain fidelity with an idea or with something for the sake of history, I guess you could say, for the sake of
or maintaining bonds. That's often
maintaining bonds, doing it for any other reason, I guess you could say, other than truth, is what is incorrect or is wrong or is bad, or like I don't want to use these kind of words that kind of sound a little bit weird.
Well, like I said, for one thing, this is for you to say because this is your personal opinion on it. So I'm kind of like constellating how these encounters tend to happen, and kind of like when Neil deGrasse Tyson and Dawkins were talking about stuff, they didn't have the same, although they had the same views about truth in general, they didn't necessarily have the same views on how to go about it. I'll give you a classic example of that was when they were talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson had someone they knew whose relative had died, and that person was telling them about this experience, so like a supernatural experience that gave them comfort, that the dead person talked to them, told them everything's going to be okay, we would meet again, and this gave this person comfort. Neil deGrasse Tyson took the view of, well, I have my views, and I'm not going to impose them on this person, and not in this place. Perhaps if the conversation had taken place in an academic, hall, it'd be different. But I'm guessing the way he said it, it's probably taking place in the funeral parlor or someone's house at the wake. So it's like right at the moment of extreme duress. So that's his way, and you can see that as noble. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson's awesome. I don't personally go that way, but like Dawkins, I admire that, and I think that's a viable way to come about it. He didn't change his own views. He kind of just listened to the person and kind of just left it open. Where Dawkins was of the view that you don't want to smash on the person, but letting it kind of go as a given is a dangerous precedent. And so he was like, I would try to be as gentle as I could. I'm paraphrasing what they kind of said. They talked a lot, but basically his take was like, I try to be as gentle as I could, but I would ask questions that show, or basically allow that person to maybe question themselves to see if they, this makes sense to them. And then, he didn't actually say this part, but I think it's what he was implied. And then even if they don't do it for themselves, it still lets them know I have a questioning mind. I didn't say, no, you didn't see a spirit, no, it didn't happen, but by saying, well, what did they say? And how did they communicate to you? And that was his take. He's basically like being a doctor on the person. That lets the other person know that you're not going along with it. You're being friendly and you're trying to ask them more questions, but the fact you're asking more questions rather than just saying, okay, I accept your story, it doesn't give as much acceptance. So there's a spectrum there. Neil deGrasse Tyson is, well, everyone knows my views. I've written books. I'll lecture next week. So everyone knows my views. I don't need to push then. While at the same time, I didn't say I agreed. Dawkins was like, I'd be friendly, but I would put questions out. One, so again, this is me paraphrasing, but so I feel that I'm being authentic myself. Just because a person's in pain and duress, it doesn't make me want to advocate truth. You know what I mean? Like, I get it, person's sobbing, they've lost relatives, and that's bad, but it's also bad for me to suddenly just drop my belief in truthful data. And then he's also
and that can make it even worse too. Like if somebody's like, sobbing, you'll probably want there to be like, but like something that's like, you don't want them to be sobbing, like you don't want that to happen. Right. But like if they're sobbing and then like, it becomes purposeless because you didn't communicate to them what you were actually trying to say, then it like that they were sobbing for no reason, it ends up making it then an actual wrong could occur there.
I think to me, my view, but that's not your view. That's why I laid out the conversation they both had, which I thought was cool on both sides. I lean more towards Dawkins in that I always try to be as gentle with people as I can. I'm a sensitive person. I hate to see people in pain. It really upsets me. But that's the second part I was going to say. I hadn't got to yet. One, which is the second part, is for them. I don't think I'm actually helping a person by going along with what I believe to be a delusion because they're in a upset state. It may temporarily make things easier for them, but I don't know if in the long run, letting someone accept things that don't have evidence for them because they're in an upset state. I don't know if that's good for anyone.
Yeah.
Although obviously in the moment, it may seem so because they're not going to react well anything other than accepting their upsetness.
Because what I was thinking is like, so if they go into like an upset state, like, but like they don't really understand what's going on, you kind of still have to, you kind of have to make it so that like that experience is actually gets them somewhere. Because like if they do that and they kind of shut down, it's tricky. It's hard to really
if I could jump on
know what to do.
You're saying, and this is where the dilemma comes in. I agree with you in general. Just to make sure you understand how I know a lot of people would come back on that, which is that saying that there's not evidence for this, which there isn't, is going to keep the wound open. Whereas if you let them sob and say, I was talked to the ghost of my relative and they said they love me, everything's okay, and you'll meet me when you die, it allows the wound to close. It's not healed correctly underneath, like, certain things weren't tied up or done as they should surgically, but it does let the wound close over. Sometimes being given truth, kind of with this purification, it does not allow one's wounded psyche to heal. Easier answers are wrong sometimes, but they allow healing. And that's kind of like a bit of the balance. Does that make sense, Guy? I know a lot of people would say, let her heal. Why can't you just give her that so she can stop being so sad? She's going to remain sad if she doesn't believe her relatives talking to her. If you say there's not really evidence for that, it'll keep her in the distressed state. That's often the arguments used of why. Just
So there's a push and pull between the productivity of like, okay, this would cause them a lot less distress and put them in a better position in the long run. If they did have a better understanding of what the right answers were, but at the same time, you don't want to be like, mean, you don't want to be like overly harsh or like put too much on them, than they can handle.
But I think we should also understand, like, to a certain degree, there is always going to be at least some kind of harm that's going to be done. So you want to go with least harm, right? So obviously trying to tell them something that they don't want to hear is going to automatically be a little bit hard for them to hear. But trying to say it politely as much as you can with the intention, like I know how you feel about this, but like trying to like word it in a way where it feels less abrasive is good, and the person should be able to note that you're trying to do that. But always there's that tricky balance of trying to say what you need to say but not have it hurt them, because nobody wants to be proven that they're wrong on something, especially when you can see that they've invested quite a bit of emotion and of themselves in that perspective that they've gone down. But yeah, so like you want to shepherd that energy correctly, which is always something that you have to do carefully and learn how to do well, and constantly try to do well as much as you can at every stage of your life, because situations like that are always gonna pop up, and it's always a kind of like a riddle. Like, how do I?
By the way, it's going to be highly charged. That's just a very highly charged moment in a human's life.
Yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes in those situations, it's hard to figure out exactly what to do. But that makes it all the more important to make the correct decision, because the reason why it's hard to figure out what to do is because, well, it's a hard decision, but also because the impact that you have in that situation can sometimes be very large. So it's going to be very significant, that you make the right decision there, whatever it may be for the given circumstance.
And I think it's also important to understand that it's important for you to say something and get that out of you in a way, because I feel like I remember those situations where I said something on a charged topic a lot more, and then days later I'm like still thinking about it, wondering how could I have said that better, and then usually the answer will come to me afterwards, or maybe it doesn't, but it's sort of like I need to say it so that at least my truth that I'm trying to express here is being expressed, and then maybe the other people around in the auditorium or whatever, they'll kind of like ping me and say, oh, no, like you forgot to mention this point, or you forgot to say it that way. It's like, yes, that would have, if I knew that, then I would have been able to say that a lot better, knowing that I would, have that other piece of the puzzle. Because I think to a certain degree, the reason why it feels like that is because we're missing something that will make it so that is being said just the right way. And that's why it feels a little bit rough and raw. But
although sometimes the roughness will just be because of how big the emotional wave is.
Right.
If you surf it really good, it can be a little choppy.
Right. So it's tricky. And
now
I tend to go with the idea of like saying something, because if I don't say something, it feels like I'm doing a disservice to humanity.
Okay, now that's important right there, because you brought this up 3 times now, and I want you to be aware of some pushback you're going to get.
Okay.
But just so you know, I actually share your view, which is why I'm very aware of the pushback you're going to get. Okay. You stated 3 times, different wording, but basically you need to say something.
Okay.
Now, pushback you'll get on this topic, which is why it's such important beats, why I thought you guys would want to have it, because as you can see, it's going to come up in life, is you'll be challenged on your need. This is critical. It's often one of the critical elements of people assessing what you're doing in this moment. A lot of people will say, you don't need. You didn't have a relative dying. You're not the one trying to get over that loss. The only person here in this situation with true need is them. You are a spectator to their need. Now,
okay.
I just know, I've been around a lot of people in my family, just in life. I'm very familiar with that sentiment. It's very popular. It's popular among some very good people. Now, I have a bit of a nuanced view. You don't have to share it. I'll kind of say how I've come at it in my life.
Okay, no, I'm actually open.
Because Glenn, I am of the mind you have on this as well.
Right.
But I'm trying to bridge it. So basically, there's a fine line I've used in my life on this subject, and it's this. If a person is stating untruth in general, and in my general presence with other people around, or even if they're not around, but they're just voicing it to the ether, that's my line. I generally go with, don't bother this person, let them grieve as they need to grieve. I don't intrude myself in their grieving process. But then there's a tipping point, and this will go to what you were talking about, the need. And the Neil deGrasse Tyson thing we talked about actually, I believe, fit into this category. If they pull you aside, if they come up to you alone, or you come to them, somehow it's just the 2 of you, even if you're in a room, they're directing it at you. Or they're doing it to the ether, but it is known that you have strong opinions on this subject, and there's no way that person didn't know Neil deGrasse Tyson's view on non-evidence. That's where I feel you're saying, Glenn, I do feel strong a need to say something then. Because, and I've got a lot of flack for this over the years, because I can be a very gentle, sensitive person. I always try to go away first, but I can also be very blunt and implacable, even in awkward situations, if I feel it's right to do so. And that's here. If you are holding my hands, saying this story about the spirits, my view, it's a view, and like I said, there's a lot of different opinions on this subject, but my view is you have included me in your narrative. That's where it changes for me, because when you say this, you're basically saying, agree with me. That's just humans 101. That's like G 101. If you basically say a story at Starbucks and you're going off and saying God this and blah this, the spirits talk to me, okay. I've been to church a lot in my life back in the day, and people said all kinds of outrageous shit around me that I thought was wrong. And I just like, whatever, we're all in church together. If we're at a party, if we're outside of the church, if we're standing by our car and we're in a small group or it's just you and me, that changes things. This is now an exchange we both share it. And so then, although I know this is sad, It's your day to grieve. True. It's not your day to state the nature of existence. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's what you're talking about, Glenn, as far as like, if you're going to state a theory of existence while holding my hands and crying towards my face, I feel that if I don't say anything then, I have given agreement. Whereas if you're just kind of saying these things and crying like a wake, I've been to some funeral stuff, and I'm just one of the people there just as a participant, and I'm just kind of there. I don't really feel that necessarily directly influences me. Whereas if I didn't say, no evidence for that, you know what I mean? I don't feel I have to raise my hand in condemnation and going, no evidence for anything she's saying. Okay, because I don't feel that if I didn't say it, I would be giving agreement. But the scenario Neil deGrasse Tyson said seemed a lot more intimate, a lot more one-on-one. To me, then, it does feel like you're asking for my agreement on a narrative, and I cannot give an agreement on a narrative I don't believe in under any circumstance.
That's a very good fine distinction you made there. And I have to agree. I personally handle these kinds of situations where it's sort of like somebody's trying to get you to do something that you don't agree with, or somebody's trying to get you to believe in a certain way. I usually feel very, very powerful during these moments, to the point where I'm like, well, I already know that this person doesn't actually change my mind on this topic. So you kind of like feel the need at that point, or at least I do, to want to like, you know, like if some person happens to like you but you don't like them, you kind of like have to break the news to them, you know, like I'm sorry, but I just, you know, I'm not with you on that, right? And just kind of be like, let them down easy in that way. And unless they're being really obnoxious for some odd reason, then I would feel the right to want to get really angry. But usually in those kinds of situations, interestingly enough, I find myself very forgiving and just not feeling like, okay, I don't really need to like break this person
right
in a very harsh way. I can just kind of like tell them like, oh no, I can't do that.
Right. But you also,
or if they try to like
feel good agreeing to a narrative that isn't really truthful to your feelings.
Of course, I don't feel good about that at all, and that's kind of like the given. Like that's, you're not going to change my mind on that at all. So there's no question about that. But so the situation is not. I'm not seeing it as like that's being threatened. I'm seeing this person, the situation as this person trying to win something that they're just not going to be able to win. You know, it's like they're talking about how they're going to jump off a cliff and not die. So I'm doing this as a favor for them to be like, no, like you don't want to do this. You don't, like, I'm trying to explain to them as best as I can, given the circumstances and context of the situation, that, you know, no, like I just don't think that way. I don't believe that way, given, you know, reasons that are like this. And so, you know, like I don't know, for some reason when you, the way you described that situation, it kind of made me think in that kind of a way, as like I would probably react in that kind of a situation. But maybe in a different situation I would react even more aggressively or whatever, I don't know. But no, yeah, like
it's very important. I hope it came across. In neither one of the scenarios would I be aggressive.
Right.
The only question is, would I interrupt their narrative? That's basically the issue. And so if I don't feel directly involved, I'm like, your narrative's your narrative. But then if I feel included in the narrative, which is kind of like you're saying, like someone likes you. Well, clearly I'm involved in this narrative. So my agreement or disagreement apparently is relevant. So then I have to give it. I try to be as gentle as I can. But Jimmy, like, it's one of those things for me. I kind of like make my Xi fit for all occasions. That makes me feel the principles are strong. To me, if someone being in a charged emotional state, which by the way is why I don't like being around people like that. I don't like going to funerals. I don't like going to those things if I don't have to, is because there is a pull to allow the emotion of it to
sweep a person off their feet, that kind
off
of
their feet, exactly. And so I can't agree to that. So for example, for me, something I've done before is that when someone's very upset around me and they said some things that I didn't believe in, it's fuzzy, but I believe I did something to the effect of I just hugged them and said, I understand this is very upsetting. And just kind of
Right.
stroked them soothingly.
Right.
And then they said something like, yes, but this really is true. And then I
As
just,
they knew, based on the way that you said it, that you didn't actually,
yes, exactly.
you're not in it the same way that they are. So
Exactly.
you can say
You can be subtle.
you don't agree with them by not necessarily saying it directly, but by indirectly. Like, yeah, I know. Come on, just give me a hug. Let's get, but yeah, you were saying I want to let you finish on that. But yeah,
But basically, yeah. So they said, so they said something out there. I hugged them and said, I understand this is a very upsetting time. And they said, yeah, but this really is what's going on. And I just hugged them again and said, okay. But
exactly. You can even agree to what they're saying, and you're still being true to you because you're like,
exactly.
you're just like, okay.
It's tricky though. It's a tricky balance.
I know it's good though. I like it, but during those situations you feel so masterful in a way, right? Like, oh, okay. I'll let you. Okay, all right. I'm not even gonna bother you on that. Just like you need this right now.
Exactly. but just because of the way your energy's like, I can see you need this. They can tell you're not agreeing.
Yeah, exactly. So I love those situations because even if you don't say anything at all, you're still being true to who you are, and you're still expressing your truth, the truth that you know, to the other person. And so they're just internally they're gonna feel a little bit angry, a little bit vexed, but they're gonna like.
Yeah, just know I did feel the need to say something because I do note this.
Yeah.
I didn't just hug them. I hugged and say, I understand this is a very upsetting time. And that little statement for me was important. It was gentle. It didn't try to rock their emotional boat, but I also felt like if they said next week, oh, and Thomas, he's really smart and everything. I told him this, and he was okay. He was down with it. I'm like, no, that's not what occurred.
Yeah.
So, are we going to? Do we want to? Do you have anything else, Glenn, to cover besides what you did?
I came up with a beat just now for the fidelity one, and this is what I wrote here.
Okay, we'll do this, and then we'll switch over to Ben.
All right, sounds good.
So, trying to maintain fidelity to anything other than truth is dangerous and can lead to becoming faithful to an illusion which should be avoided. It's interesting the way that I've written it all out. It sounds sort of like a set of rules or something that one should follow. I wanted to make it sound a little bit more personal in a way. Instead of just,
I think you should definitely, for these kind of things, since they're challenging, I would recommend what's called on the nose.
okay.
Right on the nose, and then come back and adjust it to be more, like you said, more personal, without removing the strength of what was already written.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's kind of what I did for a few of my beats. Is it sort of feels a little bit like there's no way I would present it like this, but it says it says directly what it's saying basically.
I feel like I'm saying what I want to say there, but it's kind of like, how do I add that personal element? Because I feel like it is kind of like on the nose, but I mean, what do you mean by that exactly? Like, should I be talking?
No, not on those is not bad at all. It's just a lot of times, this is well known in writing, that if you want something to be eloquent, persuasive, personal, and so on, but also needs to say certain things, it's good to write it in two drafts. The first draft is get it on the nose of like, this is what I believe, this is what I think, to make sure you have that. And then you read through, which I think you're doing now, I'm like, okay, that I do believe that. Kind of you're saying, Ben, like, I may not like speak this way naturally, but those sentences do represent my beliefs on this subject.
Mm-hmm.
Then once you have that, you kind of wait a day or two, whatever, then come back to it and see if you can't put a little bit of a personal spin, add a little sentence fragment or adjective here and there to warm it up or whatever.
Okay. I'm trying to understand how to apply that understanding to this. So maybe I should try doing this one another time?
Yeah, and we'll go to Ben now, but it sounds like you have a good idea of like on the nose. Here's what I usually do. It's very helpful for me. I first think of, what do I believe? And you simply have to think of that purely and write down, this is what I believe.
Right.
And then I come back and I speak it out and I imagine I'm talking to someone else. I'm talking to someone else that would find this relevant. And then I try to make it as warm and palatable to them as I could, as charismatic to this, imagined person as I could, without taking back anything I believe in.
Right.
Makes sense? So right now, I think you have a good idea of like, okay, this is what I believe. Now imagine saying this to someone else who may not share your view on that subject. They may be on the side of feelings, on the side of faith, on the side of fidelity, but they're a good person, a person you like. So a good person that you like is on a different side of this than you are, and you're now saying what you believe. You have to say it. There's no way around that. But you can touch it up to make sure they understand you're being warm, you're being understanding. This isn't just like a cold decision. You know what I mean? It's a humane decision that you've thought of. So that's those things you can add. Two things I think right away, Glenn. One is maybe it's something in there. It can be another sentence, or it could just be the way you word some of the earlier sentences, that this is coming from you wanting to be the wisest, most humane person you can be. And that's why you have these views. And then another thing you can do is say, imagine another person and give credit to a degree. Conditional credit. Something effective like, because feelings are important. And Bob, you can kind of like say something effect in there of like, you can understand why fidelity and feelings and faith are so strong. They weigh on people or have so much meaning to them. You're not dismissing that, but you are disagreeing.
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. That I think might just be enough then.
Cool.
Acknowledge that, give that personal touch of like, well, and relatable quality of like, feelings are important. They afflict us all, and or afflict us all. And they're a part of natural existence as a human being. But blah blah blah. They should be blah 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 like this, and then so this is where my opinion comes into play, which I think is actually truth, so and such. But I have to, it's obviously an opinion, and then kind of like word in that kind of way.
Yeah, because this just it says kind of like the good heroic place you came from to make your initial thoughts, and it shows that you're not thinking about this in a vacuum, that you have considered people who have a different view, good people who have a different view.
Right. So like acknowledging the audience, right, in a way, like given their starting position, and then kind of like leading them into what you're trying to say. But not just like jumping straight into your idea without that personal like leading kind of quality. Yeah, that makes me understand.
That, and then maybe before that is the element of your motivation. Your motivation for thinking on this subject. So if your motivation is that you want to do the best good for people possible, you want the highest truth, you want the best outcomes, and that's why you hold these views. Those two things, kind of like humanizing your motivation and humanizing opposing views. And you can do both those without changing one jot of what you believe in, which is why you need to get that first. Because these other things are nice to add on to it, but they can never actually erode your belief.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Right, Ben? That was good.
All right. Yeah, so, I mean, I did like a little bit of restructuring, but mostly I spent time fleshing out a few more of these beats. I'm mostly focused on the family stuff, and then a little bit of friends, and then I also did the evidence versus faith/feelings thing, and I did that from an angle of spirituality, because I kind of want to cover that, because that's also another common question that people ask you about is what is your what do you believe, or what's your religion or whatever. So I feel like that's a good tie-in there. But yeah, overall I'm finding the more sensitive stuff to be a lot harder to write about. I mean, which makes sense, right? Because it's so personal. You kind of want to sort of. And also it's kind of far in the past, so it's personal, so you kind of feel nervous, but also it's hard to remember, so it's hard to explain to somebody specifically the way it works, but at the same time you feel a strong connection to it, so it's oftentimes it's about just finding little nuggets that you can sort of experience that you can tie into the to the words to make them I guess not be to because I don't want to be overly vague, but I also want to explain the high level significance. But yeah, I'll get into the actual stuff. So so first one on family, which is just a high level overview. So when I was very little, I had a very vivid imagination that became progressively more difficult to openly connect and relate with others, my family included, as time went on. Around and before the age of 8, I was very energetic, a silly kid who was mostly comfortable talking about the things that I liked and was into, for the most part. However, I was also acutely secretive about certain things. For example, I remember like I would have the TV on in the living room, and like I wouldn't want anyone to watch it with me because it was like I don't know. It was I was very secretive, right, and that makes sense. And I became much more secretive, as time went on. Let's see. And often it was kind of like a paranoid thing, like, with the TV. It's like are people and it's kind of lighthearted too. Like oftentimes it's not really like super negative. I mean, I can be kind of, I guess paranoid, quote unquote, about certain things, but really I'm just being really, really cagey. So
it's natural, I think, for a lot of people, particularly some of the more sensitive oriented mojos, like say Naiji, and I think Jaileen's also mentioned this as well, being a Jaini, is sometimes when you are appreciating something, it feels very raw, and it can be something silly as a cartoon, maybe Jedi Knights or something like that, but you're really getting into it. Sometimes it can feel like you don't want the world to see you being moved like that. I know myself, I generally like to be in control of my emotions when I am around other people. You know what I mean? Even if I'm going to be fairly, like with you guys, I'm open, I'm bondy, I'm warm, but still, if I listen to a song that really moves me to where I lose track of the environment, I'm like really like taken away by it. I'll like be like taken away, and then all of a sudden like, is it singing? It's weird. How suddenly like, is it watching me? I don't know what it is, but it seems like that's kind of like hardwired to kind of protect our very childlike self. If I feel if my shiny baby is kind of like engaging in a song or a TV show, I'm kind of weird with who I let see me do that.
Yeah, you feel kind of shy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that I sometimes start like, like if I'm listening to music, I start, like getting into it, and like dancing a little bit in my seat. And then I feel myself looking at the door, kind of like nobody came in, right? Like I didn't hear somebody like stepping, like looking at me, being like, "Hey, what are you doing?"
And and sometimes there's like noises in the song too that sort of sound like doors opening and stuff, and you're like, you pull your
Or maybe they're not at all like that, but you're kind of like your brain is playing tricks on you because you're just like anxious, but it's sort of like it makes you
like just totally releasing like that. It's a very vulnerable state.
Yeah.
Even just watching cartoons. Please.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess the last sentence, this aspect of sort of being very, protective and not really wanting to share myself very much expanded from here. So, it was, I was already kind of, secret about certain things already, but it became much more like this, as time went on. And then I talk about some of the issues I had with my family growing up. One of the things that I didn't actually talk about, which isn't really like, a super personal thing, is actually I may have talked about this, but it kind of falls under the broader category. Is I moved multiple times for my childhood. I think I definitely did talk about this. But my dad, he had a job and so forth. He had to find, he found work in different states and stuff. But that was kind of like more like a family experience, I guess, of like moving from location to location. So I thought I would probably include that under that category. But yeah, so one of the major challenges I had was that because of my dad's change of work, I had to move and leave my school and friends multiple times. Once when I was 8, the other when I was 12 to 13. I think it was like during the summer, like when I was, because my birthday's like in the middle of the summer, so it was like I was on the edge of being either 12 or 13. So on top of this, within the same time frame, there were several like psychological illnesses that various members of my family have. Whether it be my immediate family or further up, like uncles and aunts and stuff. Relatives, yeah. But that still includes family. that I was previously unaware of, and that had a dramatic impact on me, and was one of the major drivers that caused me to disassociate from the world significantly more than I had done previously.
Can I ask a question?
For sure.
You said, serious impact, and then you said the result of that impact. That makes total sense. I was wondering, you don't have to, you're welcome to remain vague in this, but if you could use maybe one or two descriptive words of what that impact was. You said very impactful, and then you said it made you more removed. What was the impact? Was it scary, hurtful, disorienting?
Yeah, I should probably, yeah. I guess it was like multiple of those things, but yeah, and in different ways too, because this is kind of a broad, different, different experiences are gonna have different impact. But yeah, I think I could probably give a few descriptive words, or one or two, probably.
Even just one or two
that would be
words
good.
of impact, kind of help flesh out the story of you and make, when no one's listening to it. I kind of guessed, which is why I get the suggestions. I kind of guessed based on your reaction to the impact. But I didn't
kind of like the way that you're explaining it. It sounds to me like the impact was something that caused you to become more withdrawn. Am I right in that?
Yeah, that's what I said. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, something happened, and then it made you feel more withdrawn, and that impact, had that result.
But knowing what kind of impact, because for example, I'm sure you guys have played some stuff outside with friends and been knocked around physically, but it didn't bother you. You know what I mean?
It made me super duper excited, Andre.
So it's a question of what kind of impact was causing that reaction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know personally I can come up with all reasons for myself. Like, a bad experience might lead to being less connecting with another person. Kind of feel a little bit like that, but I don't want to put those words in your mouth. Your situation may be entirely different, but I don't know.
Yeah, we'll let Ben kind
Wait,
of
what
ponder that.
are you saying exactly? A bad experience?
He kind of knew what things would move him that way or how they move it, but like what it is for you.
Right, but I implied it was a bad experience, didn't I? Or
Okay, yeah, I was unsure whether or not I should even go there because I didn't want to say that it was necessarily good or bad. I didn't even want to put any.
But Ben, I took away from it that it was not a good experience.
right, yeah.
Yeah, my assumption was that way too. It's just I wanted to leave it more open. But yeah, I'm just trying to be careful.
But giving maybe one or two adjectives to that negative experience would help define your character more.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. It would also make it a little bit more like, I guess, more personal, like presentation worthy, I guess.
A little less vague.
Yep.
While still being vague, because you didn't give me specifics. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, I like this. It's kind of good to. I like this style of like starting out, sort of like. And I might do things differently with different beats, but like it feels good to like start out sort of mild or kind of bare bones and just sort of like add description and juicy bits like into the
add the juicy stuff earlier. This is kind of well known. Just it actually can make the initial writing very challenging. It's easier to kind of just get it out bare bones, like you said, or on the nose, and then add flesh once you kind of got a skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also I think you will agree too, having other people just be a sounding board to kind of give input as far as like how they're receiving the information and maybe giving ideas. That's also helpful too, I think. I find it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because especially if they're a group of people like ourselves that actually are high-minded and have a strong feeling of friendship, because we want to understand the story. We want to be understanding and sympathetic, and so the questions we're asking is just going to kind of like help you describe what's going on a little more, so people can kind of get on the ride with you. Because we, as your friends, we want to get on this about yourself ride with you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna write down a few things just to.
Right back.
All right. So now I'm going to move on to the next one, which is about the friends I had in Arizona, or the group of friends I had there. All right. So when I lived in Arizona, there were two friends, at least that really stood out, that I really had a close bond to at the time. I'm not sure if I should say their names here, but I think it might be kind of like, I won't say their full names, but like, I mean,
That's a
first names of like, you know, people I had like elementary school. It's kind of, it provides kind of a good effect. I don't know.
Yeah. That's
So
up to you, but if you want to,
First name.
it does bring us
Yeah.
a little more.
yeah. So Tarek and Joey, and
What's her
basically, oh, what?
What's the first name?
Tarek and Joey.
Tarig?
Tarek.
Tarek?
It's
Tarek?
That's how it's spelled.
I was only one letter off.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a tricky name. But yeah, we were basically the three musketeers. Like we were like really close. And it was also really cool because we met within like we became close within like a really short period of time. It was like only like, I think like within a few months we sort of like all like met. Like I met, I think, Joey or something, and then we met Tarek, and then we sort of like became like this cohesive group of friends. It was really cool. But yeah, that's so let's see here. So yeah, we laughed and joked constantly on the playground, went over to each other's houses and played games, ate lunch together. While all the details are hard to remember at this point, I may not say this in the actual beat. Some of the closest companionship that I've had was with these two guys. This taught me what it was like to have people I could really bond with without much of any worry or social anxiety issues. I feel like I missed out on having more of this growing up.
Nice. That's great. That's really great. One question that came to my mind when you did it was right at the very beginning. I was intrigued when you said about how you made that close bond so quickly. You don't have to, but if you could put a little something in there, it could be a sentence fragment or maybe just like a little word here or two, but maybe if you have any speculation on what made that possible. Was it your character, their character, the circumstances, whatever you might think of why that happened? Because it sounded very interesting, and you thought worth mentioning about how quickly that bond happened. So if you have any idea of what made that possible, I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think that would yeah, that'd be cool to have. Yeah, and some of these things, like that was like something I didn't actually write in the beat, but sort of like occurred to me as I was doing it. So I'm like writing down, okay, you know, I'm sort of like coming up with little interjections.
That was an interesting point you made.
Yep. So nice. So yeah, and then the last one I have that I fleshed out was the faith, evidence versus faith / feelings thing. And this might actually, I'm not sure where to put this, but it kind of relates to family. I do talk about family a little bit here because I mean, like you, a lot. Yeah, I mean, I was born into a Christian family, so it's worth talking about that. But it could probably also go other places too, because it's also kind of a high level thing about my opinions. But anyway, so I was born into.
Yeah, later on, once you flesh it out, then you can kind of maybe decide where it falls in the arc. You know,
yeah. Especially like when I get all the details. Yeah, because that often makes a big difference. I was born into a Christian family. However, my parents in general wanted their kids to think for themselves more on this topic, especially my dad. And as such, we almost never went to church. Because of this, when I was younger, I identified as being Christian. While I identified as being Christian, it was pretty easy for me to transition into atheism during my teens. While I have always held strong beliefs and convictions on various topics that, you know, in a very personal way, that weren't necessarily, you know, super heavily dependent on hard evidence, I've never been one to accept dogma as a given. Faith is quite powerful and important to one's life and personal development. and in terms of speculating as best one can on things that there simply isn't a lot of evidence for. But it is not a challenger to the concept of evidence itself. As such, I am still technically an agnostic atheist.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, the same as me.
Yeah, it's funny you said that, Glenn, because I at one point pretty like at one point like I pretty firmly identified that I actually looked into like the distinction between like agnostic atheist versus and it's kind of interesting because like most atheists that I'm aware of would actually identify as being an agnostic atheist. Like the concept of being an atheist and saying like I disbelieve very firmly. People from what I've seen, at least, it seems like more people are more along the lines of like, there's no evidence for this, thus I have no reason to believe it. Yeah. So it's kind of,
that's my view. I don't have evidence one way or the other, so I'm agnostic. But with what evidence there is so far, it's noteworthy that nothing has been put forward to help that case. So I'm atheist as well.
Yeah, for me, it was very much this like documentary thing I was reading up on about Richard Dawkins, and he was explaining those terms, and he was like, a 7 is like a complete atheist, and he personally identified himself as being like a 6 or something, and I was like, yeah, I agree, Dawkins. I want to be like you. Yeah.
This may sound weird. In my opinion, this is my personal opinion. You may share because you're agnostic atheist as well. For myself, I consider myself to be a podlaire, a free thinker, a secular humanist, things like that. And so actually, it could seem to some people that agnostic atheist is less against some of those faith-based beliefs than being atheist. But I actually have a different way of looking at it. I look at it an opposite. To me, being an atheist and being that strong against God, it kind of means that talking about that and having an opinion about that occupies a lot of your philosophical platform. Mm-hmm. But for me, it doesn't. So I think agnostic atheist is actually a little more, ironically, further away in that I really don't feel all that pumped up to go around saying I'm an atheist and like chopping down what they're doing. I mean, I do in terms of just being a truth seeker and a public intellectual, talk about my views, but I kind of like a planet or like a solar system. I don't orient my worldview around believe in God, not believe in God. You know what I mean? Like when it comes up, like say agnostic atheist, then fine, I don't have any evidence to move me. But really, agnostic kind of means like I'm really just sort of the jury is out on things without evidence, so that really I'm kind of like an agnostic everything. You know what I mean? It's like it's like I'm agnostic atheist. I'm also an agnostic disbeliever of every model. I just, you know what I mean? Like there's every model you're like I'm agnostic and I don't believe until you give me evidence.
Yeah, I mean there's nothing that would cause you to not. I mean there's nothing that would cause you to not question like. To not be open to the possibility of to not look at, possibly there being evidence that disproves what you already think about anything really. So
yeah, I think a good response to somebody who asks that, like, what are you? Like, what's your belief? You can just simply say, I believe in evidence.
Yeah.
Or if that's even like,
no, that's great. That's great, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. Is because that's, to me, defining the discussion properly, because this is basically a discussion about all seekers. And so what's your take on evidence as far as being a seeker? When you say atheist or not, it's kind of making the conversation like apparently the be-all, end-all question for a seeker is whether or not you believe in a God. I don't believe that's the be-all, end-all question. You know what I mean? To me, it's what's highest truth and what evidence do you have for that? And then every model, including monotheism, gets matched to that. Kind of agnostic atheist, it's sort of like the agnostics like the main thing, and then you have various views on other models of thought. But I forget who said it. I think it was Sam Harris. He doesn't like the term atheist, and I agree with him on why, which is like, it makes it seem like that's the dialogue. We're agreeing that that's the main discussion point. Whereas, as he said, like, because he has a lot of fondness for Buddhism, it's not necessarily my thing, but I get what he's saying. He's like, I think Buddhists are really cool. My thinking is more in line with Buddhists in some ways, and Buddhists don't think atheist or theist. They don't think of it that way. It's like, and so you're kind of forcing a theistic discussion on someone to ask them, are you a theist or are you an atheist? So I like to kind of like just like squash that question. You mean like I'm a pod layer, I'm agnostic about things that don't have evidence.
Kind of feels a bit clunky in a way, right? When you try to
clunky, but also definitely, but also to me leading. It's leading the conversation, because almost like if we start there, then the rest of the conversation is going to be God, no God. I'm a seeker. I like to know all kinds of things, and some things I have evidence for and some things I don't. And that covers everything. Every topic you could think of, I want highest truth, and my level of assertion is based on evidence for everything, not just that question. It's almost like making your spiritual identity based on one question. God, no God. God, no God. You know what I mean? It's actually, I think, a bit of cultural conditioning, because, you know, to the credit, a lot of the earlier atheists, they, you know, came up in a world that was just theist everywhere. It's a, you know, very theist world they grew in. So they kind of like, I think technically most of the earliest atheists were probably actually just free thinkers. That's how I think of myself. I'm a free thinker. But because free thinking was seen immediately as against the establishment, and the establishment was theism. So like skeptics and free thinkers and things like that, they often get called atheists. But it's like, well, really, being a skeptic or being a free thinker is much bigger than that. You are a free thinker on every question, not just that question.
What does it mean to be a free thinker? Because that doesn't seem to mention evidence in the description, but I think it's implied. It's
implied. Different people have different view of free thinking, but generally the view is, you're right, evidence is not automatic, but it's usually a very common second. It basically means I want to think for myself. I don't want you to give me any givens. Don't say there is a God given. There isn't a God given. This is the given. Women are like this. I don't want you to give me any givens. I would like to walk around nature, observe it, and develop my own givens from my own free mind. As a part of that, those kinds of people tend to be evidence-based, because they're saying, I don't want you to hand me a traditional given. I want to make my own given. Well, usually if you don't take any givens that are on the table, the only way to make them a new good given is through evidence.
I kind of like that, but at the same time, I kind of feel like critiquing it a bit in the sense that it sounds a bit like, don't tell me what I want to, don't tell me anything that I don't want to personally hear, in a way, which is kind of, it's not like I know that's not what you mean, but it's kind of like, it sounds a bit.
There are some people who feel that way, Glenn. Words, labels often get interchangeable, but the feeling you're saying is why a lot of free thinkers, for example, won't say they're free thinkers. They'll say skeptic. And a lot of times they'll use the words interchangeably, because skeptic kind of emphasizes, I don't believe anything without evidence. I have to have evidence, or my base position is I'm skeptical. So if that might, what you're talking about, free thinker maybe doesn't have implied skepticism without evidence. So so just, you know, a lot of them are very particular on being called a free thinker or being called a skeptic. Because sometimes the free thinkers will take this tack.
There's a lot of confusion surrounding this, actually, because it gets into like people persuading each other and different biases that people have. Like, for example, you're reading a news article and people will say that's biased, right? And then, you know, that they shouldn't be biased, because then that will allow people to be more free thinking, more able to come to their own, you know, more factual opinions, right, that aren't as swayed by the bias. And I think that, you know, there's kernels of truth to that, but at the same time, like, you know, to really give an opinion on something, oftentimes there needs to be like, you know, you have to, like, to cover a story or to say anything on a topic, there's always going to be, you know, opinions that come in there. You should try your best, obviously, to make sure you're being as fair as you can, right, to take the best practices for writing, you know, making good journalism, but at the same time, you know, you can't eliminate opinion from something, and nor should you.
Yeah. Definitely. But going back to what you're saying, that's very true, Ben. But going back to what you're saying real quick, Glenn, on the free thinking thing, I have two opinions on that. One is NPCs versus PCs. Because myself, I could definitely fall under the category of skeptic. I'm very evidence driven. But I also see a point for free thinker. Here's why. Now, the bad side is what you're saying, Glenn. Maybe you're free thinking this thing over here just because those are your personal experiences and the evidence isn't maybe strong as it should be. So maybe you should be more skeptical about your free thinking, right? Is that basically what you're kind of getting at? That free thinking does not imply enough skepticism or requiring of evidence?
It sounds, well, I don't know if I'm not sure I completely understand exactly what you're saying there, but I feel like
I won't say you then. I'll kind of say people in general who use these words. Those who prefer the label skeptic, although a lot of times the difference between skeptics and free thinkers is nominal. But one thing they have is those who prefer being called skeptic is they're like free thinking perhaps does not have enough guiding rails of evidence to make sure your free thoughts aren't just going where you want them to and are not in touch with reality.
Right.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Why I'm okay with the term free thinker is this, because you're right. There's a lot of people who do that, who call themselves free thinkers, and I would say they're kind of NPCs. They're not really doing the secret thing.
Yeah.
But I don't dismiss the term completely. And here's why.
Sure.
Martian Manifesto has produced a lot of groundbreaking evidence, and it will continue to do so. However, there were decades of free thinking, of just feeling my spirits were giving me something worthy to inquire about. Now, I'm also a skeptic. I demanded of my spirits, myself, and the world that I'm only going to go so far with this teaching story in my head as I have evidence to back me up. So in that part, I'm skeptical. I don't push harder than the evidence allows for. But there's a difference between pushing and inquiry. I've been inquiring about the meaning of existence and so forth through my Martian Manifesto teaching story for decades before I had evidence to back it up. And so I feel I should have the right to do that. And if what I'm thinking flies in the face of tradition or commonly believed things or so forth, or limited evidence, I would like the ability to follow it. While on the other hand, I accept, notice this thing here, this edge, this comes out very strongly in the secret open table. I am skeptical when it comes to how much I will assert. But I am a proud free thinker, and I don't know where my insights are going to come from, and if they don't come from a slideshow of cells, that's fine. If they come from a fantasy comic book in my head, if it eventually leads to evidence, I'm okay with that, and I believe I have the right. This is where we talk about the secret open table, like speculation, even things that aren't my thing, like life after death, heaven, this and that. You have that right. I believe you should have the right to pursue philosophical thought wherever it takes you, as long as you really are doing that not because you were told, but because you're just trying to find that flame of truth and where it takes you. Sometimes a flame of truth leads you before the evidence for its validity shows itself. So I consider myself to be a free-thinking skeptic. Free thinker in pursuing my own interests, skeptical as far as assertions. Did that make sense?
Skeptic. I know. I know what you're trying to say. I feel like I want to critique the word skeptic a little bit here too. I'm looking at the definition. It just says a person inclined to question or doubt all accepted opinions. And I agree, but it's sort of saying, it just kind of makes you think of like someone who just doubts things for the sake of doubting. And not to say that doubting isn't good, but again, it doesn't imply like holding on to evidence when you find it.
You're right. And you're not wrong. There are skeptics that go that far. And I think we covered that in the CNC. And as a part of that, I also critique that you can get to where doubt everything just to the point where actually that's not helpful.
To be a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And conspiracy theorists, I mean, they still, like everyone, and that's the thing, like you can't really doubt everyone is going to have, some beliefs about things. Like if you keep doubting, there's always going to be things that crystallize you hold on to. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to survive and live. There's always going to be principles that you follow, ways you conduct yourself in your life that are based on what you believe to be true about life and the universe. But it's like, but at the same time, some people do doubt more than others, or are less more withholding of that, and that can be good or bad depending on the situation. But yeah, like for example, like a conspiracy theorist is a good example of why that might not necessarily be good, because they doubt quite a bit. In fact, they often doubt way more than people who tend to believe more in conventional wisdom about things. And that can be an example where skepticism could end up not working, because it isn't being skeptical for the right reasons, or in the right situations. So.
Yeah. Even I mentioned this the other time that we had a hangout. Even the idea of being a contrarian is kind of like, you can critique that as well. I don't really like that description either, because it's sort of like, you're just doing things to be different. You're just trying to. That came to me later on. I was like, I kind of feel a little bit.
Yeah, the word itself is kind of like implying that it's
negative or something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just trying to be contrary for the sake of being contrary.
Yeah.
So I think a good word is like just truth, being a truth seeker. I guess
that's the word I came with. When you look at all the other options, agnostic, free thinkers, skeptical, contrarians, like they have some stuff, but really, aren't you just a seeker? In fact, if you're a seeker, you'll be contrary, skeptical, etc. to the right degree. You'll have the right cocktail of those things. But just being skeptical, like that's what I am. I'm a skeptic. I don't know. I think that as a seeker, that puts you a little bit in the box.
You can. It makes sense. I like the idea of being a truth seeker, and like that's what I am. I kind of feel like that's like a adjective. Like
it's pure.
What's Glenn? Glenn's a truth seeker. What's Coach? Coach is a truth. Ben. Truth seeker.
It's pure. It's pure.
And then there, agnostic atheist sounds a bit different in a way, in the sense that it kind of.
Yes, exactly.
You're a Christian. You're an atheist.
I don't know if this you're saying, but to me, I feel like that when you say like agnostic, atheist, things like that, it almost feels like I'm a truth seeker, and that's what I am. And then you ask my truth-seeking self, what's your opinion on theism? Right? So like my truth seeker opinion on theism is I'm an agnostic atheist. But that's not what I am. That's almost like an opinion of one of the many opinions I hold as a truth seeker.
Right. So yeah, I guess if they ask you a question on a test, like in terms of what is your belief in religions, then it would be correct to say agnostic atheist, because that's exactly what the question is asking.
Yeah. But it's more open-ended, like just what do you believe? What are you about? Like with no qualifier, truth seeker.
Yeah, that would be a truth seeker. And you kind of feel a little bit angry with the question, because it's like, yes, I want you to ask me something a little bit more.
I feel hemmed in.
Yeah, right. Yeah, kind of a little bit like you're being forced to answer this very limited question, where you feel like there's so much more that so much more of a dialogue that should be had.
And it's kind of like
on surveys. I mean, sometimes I'll just say like, this is a bad question, and this is why I believe, and here's why. It's like,
that's a free thinker right there. Exactly. Because I keep thinking all of them. Right now I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to decide not to answer this question because I don't think it's adequate.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, it totally makes sense. Like, this is not important of a question, and people think that this person's trying to be unreasonable. They're trying to avoid the truth. No, it's because I have what I'm talking about, it actually kind of supersedes this conversation that we're having a little bit here.
Yeah, because it's sort of like Loudmouth. Like I just picked one just random just because it has such specificity to it. Like Islam, like they have different designations for every human as they relate in status to Islam. So it's almost like, so are you this, and this, and this? All those designations that you gave me as a buffet to choose from, they all are positions in your worldview. I don't accept your worldview as the worldview. I have my own worldview. I'm a Podlair. You know what I mean? That's how I see myself. But they're like, well, that means you're a kafir. That means you're this. And I'm like, okay, that's you. That's your label on me. That's not my own personal label for myself.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like atheism is almost like a label that, theists give. Oh, so you don't believe in God. Because for them, that's like the big question. For me, that's not the big question.
Yeah, they don't give you enough options to answer the question. Because some questions you kind of can give a direct answer to, but if it's a deep and philosophical question, oftentimes if it's multiple choice and it's there's only 3 answers for do you believe it like that like God is like this or like this or like this? There's only three options, right? It's like none of the above. You know?
It's like a joke on that. I've heard like two variations. One's atheist and one's Buddhist. Either way, it's the same joke. That kind of like highlights this. We kind of end on it. Is like back when the IRA, there's still a thing, but there was a period of time where it was more intense. And so it was like a thing between Catholics and Protestants. And so there was a joke where, an atheist or a Buddhist, either one, goes to Ireland and they're like, are you a Protestant or Catholic? And the person's like, I'm an atheist. Yes, but are you a Protestant or a Catholic atheist? People just want to put you like in their categorizations. But like, what? That doesn't apply to me.
Yeah. Oh man, this can explain a lot of why people misunderstand other people. Why one person might be like having an argument with another person, and then both feel as though neither one has really been understood correctly, because both are trying to understand each other from two worldviews that are not really taking the other person's into account. Or maybe it's one side, or maybe it's a little bit more, balanced either way. But it can lead to all kinds of issues. So you kind of have to be a little bit open.
Around that is, and you saw that I did this approach in the CNC. And it's an approach I've seen from pretty much all great thinkers on this subject. Because of that problem and other things, but that's a major reason you brought up there, Glenn, is asking, what is your view on this principle? And any human could have a view on that principle. And then you have a collection of principles that you ask their opinion on, and ask if there's principles that they have that maybe you haven't thought of. Because principles are universal, but labels and categorizations by worldview are not. You know what I mean? So like, do you believe in capital punishment? That's a principle. Any person from any belief system, any political background, any way of thought can give their opinion on the principle of capital punishment. You know what I mean? But like other things, it gets like, that's too specific to your worldview. Like, that's a very your language. So like, we're talking in your language. But whether or not you believe in capital punishment, that's just an activity that humans can or cannot do. And then you could have, now if you want to bring in your worldview more, you can say why your worldview brings you to have that principle belief on capital punishment. Do you know what I mean? And that coming afterwards, but it shouldn't lead the talk. Otherwise you really can't go anywhere, because you basically are talking, two people are talking. It's like being an ambassador 101, diplomacy 101. You have to find some common language to speak on. If you can't do that, then you're like a British person with a monarchy talking to a Confucian with a completely different court of how they do things. And so trying to make any kind of one-to-one comparisons, they just don't work like that. But you can say this principle. How does your Confucianism address this principle? How does your Christianity, how does your free thinking, how does your Contrarianism address this principle? And that's why, like I said, the CNC was organized that way, because I've had this talk many times in my life, and you really want to skip this language barrier right away. And so going to principles skips that. As soon as you start getting into that, first of all, we don't speak the same language. Second, you can change the meaning of a word. You mean like, kafir means this. No, it doesn't. It means this, this, and this. And like, this scholar says it means this. And this scholar, I'm like, oh, goodness. Language is very slippery, but principles, a bit more mathematic.
Yeah, when you start working with actual evidence, we're truth seekers, Yeah. Looks like we're a little bit over time.
Time to go. That was a very good session. Before I sign off, to say thank you guys for being so understanding and listening to me talk before about the purifying I'm doing. I know it's rough. I warned you guys. You saw the video I did beforehand. Remember I told you, I said this is going to get rough. But I appreciate you being along for the rough ride. And my spirits assure me it is finite. There's only so much ignorance and stupid that my upbringing and past life experiences have caked in there. And I'm scouring that crap out every day. And so it's only a matter of time before I get to the last of it. I'm like, thank goodness.
That's also a puzzle only takes a finite amount of time to solve. Eventually, it will be solved.
That's true. The universe is literally finite, and so that's also another very reassuring point. How much is there? I mean, you can argue that there's like there's an infinite amount of songs, but no, there's not. There's only a finite amount of songs. but still, there's a shit ton of songs. That you can
Exactly. It's like, it's finite. I'm like, yeah, but how big is this finite?
Yeah. But yeah, it's
a great session.
I still think that it's not impossible though. It's definitely like a doable amount.
It's doable. All right, thank you guys, and I'll see you on Sunday.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sounds good.
Real quick, for next time, just keep doing what you're doing, so you can bring a few more beats, and we'll continue the same kind of conversation.
Sure.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah.
Good night.
Night.
Have a good night, guys.
Good stuff.